Welcome to a place inhabited by many types of creatures. These creatures can be found anywhere, from the caves, the lands, the sky, and even the sea. Some participate in fun combat with them, while others perform alongside them. We still don't know much about these mysterious creatures, and yet they help us in many different ways, and we can't even begin to fathom what we would do without them. But that's enough of that. Let's begin this story, shall we? Welcome to the world of... Yeah, now thinking about it, doesn't really make sense to start a book from the middle, huh? Let's start from the beginning. From the very, very beginning. Let me repeat it one more time. Welcome to the world of... Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that little cinematic I did for you guys, because I'm never doing that again. It took me way more time than it should have. Now let's talk about the topic of today's video. The birth of literally everything in the Pokemon franchise. Let's call it Chapter 0, if you will. The beginning of everything. Now before time and space, there was nothingness, a vast amount of emptiness in the world. Although I probably shouldn't say nothingness because there was something, and that was an egg. Yep, you heard me, an egg. But although it looked like an egg, it wasn't all that. It was actually harboring something much more immense and powerful, a deity known as the Original One. Now the first thing the Original One did after awakening from its slumber was create 3 different entities that controlled this specific concept, one being time, one being space, and the other being antimatter. Now after these 3 entities were given their respective concepts by the Original One, they were then given names. One was named Giratina, one was named Palkia, and the other was named Dialga. Dialga was the controller of time, Palkia was the controller of space, and Giratina was the controller of antimatter. Now once the Original One created these 3 separate entities, they had one task they had to fulfill, the creation of an entire multiverse. And then just like that, the Pokemon multiverse was born. But some people tend to forget that there's multiple different timelines and universes consisting of different continuities within that said Pokemon multiverse. But then again, we're talking about the very beginning of Pokemon. All these stories that I'm talking about have yet to be unraveled, so was there really anything interesting back then? And well, yeah. Like first and foremost, how did Pokemon life begin? And how did Pokemon even look like back then? And all this kind of stuff leads back to one single Pokemon in particular, Mew. Now for those of you who don't know, Mew consists of every DNA strand of Pokemon to ever exist. After the creation of the Pokemon multiverse, the creation trio then went on to create a bunch of different Mews wandering the planet, and the first few of these Mews then went on to develop some of the Pokemon that we know today, known as Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza. Now the birth of Groudon and Kyogre is what really made the Pokemon planet. Groudon was the one who created the land, while Kyogre was the one creating the sea. They were both polar opposites of one another, which then led them to fight a lot, but Rayquaza was there to calm their anger. Rayquaza was mainly there to maintain balance over the world and make sure there was enough sea and land for life to prosper. Now it's important to mention that Groudon and Kyogre looked more like this when they were battling against each other. This is what we call primal reversion. Primal reversion was a state that Groudon and Kyogre would both undertake when at their most powerful, but also at their most dangerous. But after their big battle against Rayquaza, they both went on into deep sleep. Groudon rested in the depths of a volcano, and Kyogre rested in the depths of the sea. With many years past, there were now new Pokemon to make the planet look more like the Earth we know today. One of which was Regigigas, who merged the continents together to make the foundation of the places that were to be. He then went on to create little minions of himself based on a specific element, that being Regi-Ice, Regi-Rock, Regi-Steel, Regi-Draco, and Regieleki. And then after that, just like Groudon and Kyogre, he then went on to slumber into the temple, or which would later be known as the Temple of Sinnoh. And then after that, pretty much everything was set in stone. We had our elements, we had our continents, the land, the sea. What could go wrong, right? Right? Now boys and girls, back to the creation trio, there was one entity in particular that really made the Original One mad. And of course, it was the middle child, Giratina. After Giratina saw the established Pokemon multiverse, he then went on to say, I want to rule everything. And of course the Original One didn't allow this and put Giratina in its own dimension called the Distortion World. And the Distortion World was completely made to be an upside down version of the Pokemon multiverse. But can we just take a second to think how Arceus thought it was a good idea to give one of the creation trio members the power of antimatter? I mean, was that really asking for love? But Giratina wasn't just sitting there doing nothing, because the upside down world known as the Distortion World was linked to the Pokemon multiverse, so if anything happened to either one of those, it would affect each other. A cool neat thing about Palkia and Dialga though is Palkia's breathing is what keeps space stable, whereas Dialga's heartbeat is what keeps time stable. Cool neat thing. Other than the creation trio, there were many other Pokemon that help make life prosper, some of those Pokemon including Xerneas and Yveltal. with these two Pokemon maintaining balance over life and death, Xerneas for life and Yveltal for death. And it wasn't just these Pokemon either. Remember when I talked about the Regis? Each Regi represents an aspect of life. Regi-Ice represented ice, Regieleki represented electricity, Regi-Steel represented steel, Regi-Rock represented rock, and then Regi-Draco we don't talk about Regidraco. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I have no idea on what Regidraco really is because we just don't have too much information, and all we know is that he has the powers of every dragon type Pokemon, which isn't necessarily true because there's absolutely no way he has the powers of the Creation Trio, because he was literally made by Regigigas, and Regigigas was made by the Creation Trio. After a long while though, the remaining Mew would then evolve into future Pokemon that we kinda know in today's time, these being the Pokemon from the fossils. Back in the day, there was a huge number of fossil Pokemon, but in today's time, they either evolved or just met their demise. Now, normally the story would end here until Pokemon Scarlet and Violet got released and gave us some new information about the past Pokemon. Now, the Pokemon of the past looked very similar to the Pokemon of today's time, in alternate timelines that is. For example, there was a Paradox version of Jigglypuff, a Paradox version of Amoonguss, a Paradox version for Salamence even. And this is what marked the birth of the Pokemon world, and now it was set in stone. But this isn't the end. After all, it's only